Hello, my name is Chris Conkling, and today we are going to talk about translating foreign poetry. I'm going to do it into English, but you can think of the principles to do it into whatever language you want to do. We are going to have 4 examples: Icelandic or Old Norse, Japanese, biblical Hebrew, and Homeric Greek. So we're going to start with the Hávamál from some Old Norse. Oh, my name is Chris Conkling. I co-wrote the screenplay to the animated Lord of the Rings movie. I've taught at a university. I've translated the Iliad, lived in Japan for several years. And I also have a company on learning foreign languages called A Novel Approach to Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, etc. Now, we're going to start with several strategies. 7. Number 1, when we see a poem in another language that we want to translate for fun or for publication or for whatever reason you want to, we need to learn the literal meaning of each word. Okay, we have to get the meanings right, but that's not the end of it. That's just the beginning. Then we have to listen to the sound games the poem is making, because poems are usually written to be read aloud. So there's rhymes, there's meter, there's alliteration, there's assonance, where the vowels rhyme, but the words don't really rhyme, and many other consonants, many other items that we could talk about. So we can't just translate the literal meaning. We have to listen for the sounds. Then we have to understand the language enough to see if there's some kind of metaphors or allusions, if there's connotations, some hints. Maybe it's a pun where there's 2 words would have the same meaning or similar meanings, or they're repeated parts of words. So whatever games are being played in that poem. And then what I always do is I look at 4 or 5 other great translators that are professionals that have more skill than I have. And I consider what they did, and then I critique it. Would I make the same choice? Would I make a different choice? Now, if there is no translations, if you're going into a new language and you're the first person, that's much more difficult. You really have to know the subtleties of that language. But if you're not an expert in that language, then you can look at what other people have done. I'm going to look at both their best ideas, and I will choose some. I'll make some compromises, maybe between sound or imagery or the full implication of the meaning. I have to compromise sometimes. And when I find a word in another language that's a cognate or in some way is very similar to my language, I'm going to try to use that word. In Greek, if we have hero, we understand what a hero is, so I will try to use hero. Other words like that. And then I will try to propose something original. It may be better, it may be worse, but it's my own. And it will have to do with the philosophy. What am I trying? Why am I doing this? What am I trying to do? That'll become important when we get to the Greek, when we do the Iliad, because I had a very unique philosophy when I did the Iliad. So those 7 principles are in mind. Let me read you one Bible scholar, Robert Alter, who wrote several books about translating the Bible. I met him. He signed my autograph, his books that I had bought. A very nice man. All translations are no more than approximations of the original. They're approximations. But I want to try it rather than give readers a misleading impression that the Hebrew has a single flat meaning. It's not just the flat single meaning of a literal translation. You're trying to do much more in poetry. And then he concludes, it often involves painful compromise. You gain something, but you give up something. So I found his comments very helpful, and we'll come back to him later. So we're going to start with the first one, the Hávamál, the words of Odin. Very famous stanza 60, 76, and 77. We'll just do two stanzas. And it's been translated widely. That's why I like it. Here's what it actually sounds like from somebody better than me.
Döja fränder, dör själver detsamma. En årstier dör aldrig, skön ser huvan detta.
Cow dies, kinsmen die. Oneself, silver, dies,
the same sun.
But
fame, Orstier, dies never, dör aldrig. For that one, when goes
on. His pronunciation is much better than mine, so I wanted you to hear him. And now we'll go into the literal translation of the stanzas. You heard them, you can read them. Dire fe, dire frander, dire sjalte sama. Okay, now what do those words mean? We're going to look at several translators. We'll include him, and then I'll show you what I have done with it. Now, I want you to notice one thing here. If you studied Beowulf, it's written in alliterative half lines. There's alliteration in the first half of the line and then in the second. This Old Icelandic or Old Norse or Old West Norse, to be very academic, has the same kind of alliteration. You can see it. The first line, the D sound, then the F sound, repeated with the D sound and the F sound. The second line has SS, the third line DD, the fourth line GG. Now, the first two lines are repeated in these stanzas, so DF and SS, and then DD and DD. So when I translate it, I'm not just doing the literal, I'm trying to repeat the sound games. So here's one translation. Cattle die, kinsmen die. It's very straightforward. It just says cows die, kin dies. 4 syllables or 5 syllables in the original. Thyself too soon must die. But one thing never, I ween, will die, fair fame of one who has earned it. And in the second line, but one thing never, I ween, will die, the doom of each one dead. That word doom is important to us. It doesn't just mean fame, it means the judgment, doomsday, the doomsday book. In Tolkien, we have drums in the deep, in the mines of Moria. The Dahmer, the doom on each man's dead. Here's another translation. Cattle die, kinsmen die. One day you die yourself. But the words of praise will not perish when a man wins fair fame. Next translation. But fair fame never dies for the one who wins it. Next translation. But fair fame will fade never. He used the sound 3 times, the alliteration and the assonance. Fair fame fed. I win for him who wins it. Now, I decided against fair fame because I love the sound of it. But America, I believe, has ruined the meaning of the word. So it's not the way the Vikings understood this word or the Icelanders understood it 800 years ago. To us, fame, I want to live forever. There's a movie. Fame means being a Kardashian. You don't have any accomplishment. You're just famous for being famous. Well, the Vikings or the Icelanders didn't mean it that way. If you have a good reputation, if you've gained a good name. So I decided to go away from fair fame, even though it sounds so nice. Loftur Bjarnason, another professor that I met. Cattle die, kinsmen pass away. We all die in the course of time. One thing lives forever, the judgment passed on a man at his death. Again, judgment, or the next translation by Magnusson, the verdict. Again, that word Dahmer. Now, Magnusson did something very interesting, didn't he? It's not a lone cow out in a cold, icy hill meadow in Iceland. It's your cow. It's your farm. Okay? We were just in Iceland. They leave the horses out all winter because they grow extra coats of hair. but the cows and the sheep they keep inside. So Magnuson says it doesn't really mean cow or cattle. It means wealth. Wealth dies, kinsmen die. Okay, everything you've earned dies. All your family will die. A man too. You yourself will likewise die. So that gives me another meaning. I didn't want to really call it wealth because the word is cow. Jackson Crawford says the word fe today in Iceland is the word for sheep. But 800 years ago when this was written, it meant cattle or cows. He also says the word in the second line, sama, is the same. Dolmer is doom or fate or judgment or verdict. So are we going to go with cows die, wealth dies? So I tried to come up with a compromise. It's not a lone cow. It's your cow. It's your livestock. So this is how Jackson Crawford did it quickly. Cows die, families die. You will die in the same way, but a good reputation instead of fair fame never dies for one who earns it well. So I started with cattle die, kinsmen decay. Again, the KD sound repeated by the KD sound. Then I went simpler. Cows die, kin dies, 4 syllables. Or cattle die, death comes to kinsmen. There I did it reverse, KD and then DK. But I decided to go with farm stock, which is somewhere between wealth and cattle. Farm stock die, families decay. Death tolls for us all the same. But death won't take the memory of a man, not if he's gained a good name. And on the right, you can see the alliteration, FD, SS, MM, GG. Again, farm stock die. I'll show you next one, which has the original right by it. Second stanza, farm stock die, families decay. Death tolls for us all the same. Idsama. I wanted to use that word. But one thing I know that never dies, what's judged of the dead man's deeds. I wanted to get that word for judgment or verdict. Okay? So I compromised. As I said, one of the principles is to compromise between the very stark and simple cows die or wealth, which wasn't really close enough for me. So I went to farm stock die, families decay. So that's how I did it. What would you choose? Did I do it right? Did I do it wrong? We can talk about that when we get to the questions. Now we're going to jump to a haiku, Japanese poetry. This is a great book, The Poem Behind the Poem, Translating Asian Poetry. If you're interested in it, I'm sure you can find it on Amazon or somewhere. So haiku is very simple, right? Just 5, 7, and 5, just 17 syllables. In Japanese, the rhymes are not important. The sound games maybe are not important. We'll find out. But it's so easy to rhyme in Japanese. The past tense of every verb literally rhymes, so you could have thousands of rhymes. But this is Basho in the late 1600s, probably the greatest haiku writer. So 5 syllables. Natsu kusuya. Natsu means summer. Kusa means grass. Very simple. Summer grass. But the sounds are assonant, right? They're repeated. A, u, a. Natsu kusaya. Okay, then the second line, 7 syllables. Suamono domo na. Okay, today suamono means domo is plural. It means a tough guy. But in Basho's time, it meant a hero, a brave hero, a great warrior. So Natsu kusaya, suamono domo na. And there's some internal rhyme there, isn't there? Yume no ato, of the dream after. Yume is dream, no is possessive. Boku no uchi, my house. Boku no hon, my book. Boku no kuni, my country. Yume no ato, the afterword of the dream's postscript. So that's the literal meaning. And some of the sound games, right? We're noticing the sounds as well. We're lucky in this case because Basho actually told us what he meant. He wrote about it. And he said, I went to a meadow. There was clumps of summer grass, but it was a great war site. And I realized that all that heroism, all that death, all that sacrifice, centuries later, is just a bunch of summer grass. We traveled to Scotland last year. We saw Culloden, the great battle where the Scottish were cruelly defeated by the British. Nothing but beautiful fields and meadows now, but it was once a site of so much bloodshed. So, somewhat similar to the Viking comment, what really matters? What's going to live beyond us? It's not our cows, it's not our families, it's going to be our reputation. So let's look at some translators. This one's a little too literal for me. Summer grass, where the warriors used to dream. I don't know if I agree with that one completely. Let's look at another. A mound of summer grass. Are warriors' heroic deeds only dreams that pass? Okay, all those warriors' heroic actions and deeds and dreams turned into a mound of summer grass. I like that one. I like this one better. A dream of warriors, and after the dreaming is done, the summer grass. And I like this one a little better. Summer grasses, all that remain of great soldiers' imperial dreams. So I took those and tried to do my own. I played a little bit of that assonance with clumps and summer, the UM sound. Clumps of summer grass. Once warriors' bloody dreams, deeds, later only grass. I don't know if I'm 100% happy with that. I tried with some other ones. I'll show you those real fast. Brave heroes once dreamed, fought, killed. Today it's all just clumps of summer grass. Maybe that's too right on. It's not evocative enough. Or summer grass blows. When I see summer grass, I think of the wind. Summer grass blows, bends where warriors once dreamed, killed, now windy clumps of grass. I think I like the first one better, but what do you like the best? And how would you do it? That's the challenge. Okay, we're going to move on now to ancient Hebrew. Out of the whole Bible, we're just going to do one verse, Ezekiel 16:7 from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament as sometimes called. Here's the 3 books by Robert Alter that I really liked: The Art of Biblical Poetry, Biblical Narrative, and Biblical Translation. Now, when I was in school, they said the Hebrews did not rhyme like we rhyme. They didn't rhyme. They rhymed ideas, not sounds of words. So, for instance, in Genesis, it says, Ada and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, mark what I say. Okay? Lamech is talking to his wives. He calls them by name, and then he just calls them his wives. It's repeated. It's just repeated. The rhyming is in the idea, not the sound of the words. Ada and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, mark what I say. Or another example, sometimes the second line will be the opposite, the contrast. Weeping may last for the night, but a shout of joy comes in the morning. Okay, night, weeping, morning, joy. So sometimes the rhyme is just the contrast of the opposites. There's others too. I'm not going to go into all those. But after reading Robert Alter, I realized, no, there is sound games in the original Hebrew. So we're going to look at Ezekiel 16:7. It's a great little chapter. It's the whole Old Testament in one chapter. If you want to read it, it tells a story, a parable. A young man is riding down the road. He sees a baby in a ditch. The baby's umbilical cord is not even cut. It's just left there by somebody to die. But he takes that baby home. He saves its life. He cares for it. He washes her, cleans her. She grows up in his household. Eventually, she becomes a beautiful young woman. He falls in love with her. He marries her, very tender love story. But then she cheats on him and it becomes very vicious, the second half of that chapter. It's a parable. And the parable, of course, is God finds the nation Israel. Israel is a bunch of slaves in Egypt. He saves them, raises them, and then they go after other gods. So he's angry with them, but he keeps his covenant with them. So our one verse is when she turns into a beautiful woman. Here's King James. I have caused thee to multiply as the bud of the field, and thou hast increased and waxen great, and thou art come to excellent ornaments. Thy breasts are fashioned, thy hair is grown, whereas thou wast naked and bare. Okay. We'll look at a couple others. I helped you thrive like a plant in the field. In other words, I helped you become a myriad. I helped you grow and become numerous. You grew up and became a beautiful jewel. Your breast became full. Your body hair grew, but you were still naked, or you had been naked. Okay, so those are some other translations. For resources, if you go to BibleHub.com or Bible Gateway, they'll have 30 translations. And then at the end, they'll have the original Hebrew, or in the New Testament, the Greek. And you can actually see how other people have done it, and then you can try it on your own. It's actually, it's a lot of fun, actually. So the first word, I made you thrive, I made you flourish. It actually is, I turned you into 10,000. I've caused you to multiply. Rabava is 10,000. You became 10,000. Kisema, like a plant, a sprout. Now, in English, plant can be a verb or a noun, so it can sprout or blossom or bud. In this verse, they use it twice. Okay, so they have kitsemak and then zimeach. My pronunciation is probably not very good. Okay, so we are going to use that word at least twice because it's a little play on the word. And then we have some other words. Watirbi, watigli. Sounds very similar. The wa actually means and. So and this, and you grew up and matured. And then we have adayim. You became beautiful. You're finally ornamented. Shadayim, your breasts. So we have adayim, shadayim. We have internal rhyme in the original Hebrew. We have edom wa edia. You were naked and you were bare. Edom wa edia. So you can hear the assonance, you can hear the alliteration, you can hear the internal rhyme. Okay? It's not just the ideas are rhyming, but the sounds are rhyming if you really are trying to translate the Bible in agreement with the beauty of the original languages. So the New English Bible, again, I tended you like an evergreen plant, like something growing in the fields. Your breast became firm, your hair grew, and you were still naked and exposed. I don't know why not just naked and bare. There's no meter in naked and exposed. Anyway, that's how they did it. Here's how I did it. I tried to take that internal rhyme, those alliterations, and all of that. Like a lone, and I wanted to keep the idea of 1,000 or 10,000, so I kept that idea. And the buds I kept, and the alliteration. Like a lone bud in a meadow, I bade you burst into thousands. Your jeweled face so stunning, your breasts, your tresses becoming, your buds blooming, though your body was naked and bare. So we had a lot of B sounds repeated, alliteration, and we have the internal rhymes with breasts, tresses, hair, and then stunning, becoming. Like a lone bud in a meadow, I bade you burst into thousands, your jeweled face so stunning, your breasts, your tresses becoming, your buds blooming, though your body was naked and bare. Again, that's how I did it. I'm not saying it's better. It's a little different. It's a little original, but you have to decide what you like, and maybe you want to try something like that. Now, for our last example, we're going to go to Homer's Iliad. So many translations of the Iliad. Richmond Lattimore had a very close to the Greek meter. He wanted to give you the Greek experience. Robert Fagles is the bestseller right now if you went into Barnes & Noble. But there's every 5 years after him, there's somebody new. I'm not going to go through all those. But we'll look at the opening lines just to give you a sense of the ancient Greek, okay? Meaning, aede, thea, peliadeo, achilleos, okay? Meaning means rage, fury, anger, wrath. but it's very special. It's usually reserved for the gods, so it's more powerful than normal anger. So we'll see in a minute, Fagels and other people use it 2 or 3 times. The rage. That's what we're singing about in this book. O goddess, Thea. We know Thea from theology or atheist. We know that word, right? And Achilles, son of Peleus, of that destruction which countless Achaeans caused. There we have a word like Achaios. We had Achilleos, and now we have Achaios, a little alliteration. Third line, Polos de ipsthemos. Polos, of course, means, we know that word, right? From polygon, or even polyglot, means many. So let's use that word if we can. Pasukas aidi. Pasukas is our word for psychology, right? That's our root. Psyche means soul, breath, life. Haidi, I'm sorry, I didn't say it with the H. Haidi means Hades, hell. And the next word, hero, autos. We know that word. So there's a lot of these words we actually know, don't we? Kunason means dogs, not too close to canine, but maybe originally it was. So let's take that. We can't translate it word for word in order like that. Nobody would read that book. So, this is how I did it. I took it from 1 rage to 4. Rage, manic rage, and wrath, pure pissed off fury. Of Pele's boy Achilles, help me, my sweet filly. To sing of killed Achaeans, countless heroes rotting, cast to hell, left out there for hawks and hounds besotting. Now I have to tell you a story. I'm sorry about that. I have to tell you a story. I was teaching the Iliad. And I realized all these beautiful English translations. They're such great scholars of Greek, better than I could ever be. But they've got it wrong. I decided all these elegant British and English and American translations are wrong in one way. You know, very few people read the Iliad today, but for thousands of years, 2,500 years, it was so popular. It's a very violent book, you know, arrows shooting ears and cutting out eyeballs. Anyway, what's the story about? Wild young men that sleep around and they fight over women and they kill each other over it and they brag about it. And I realized this is not an elegant British poem. This is a country and Western song. This is a cowboy song. So once I decided to work with that philosophy, I had a specific philosophy, many more idioms popped up to me. I could use, you know, instead of Peleus' son, Achilleos, I could just use Pele's boy, Achilles. The last words in the whole book are, and so they buried Hector, tamer of horses. No, he was a bronco buster. Bronco busting Hector. So I'm sure some people will be offended by that, but I wanted to do it as the idioms gave me many more idioms. In fact, even in Homer, I found the word bite the dust. When he died, he bit the dust. That's not a cowboy phrase. That's a Homeric phrase. So we'll go about 85 lines later in the first chapter for the last example we're going to show. And here's literal translation from the Greek. I just want to point out a couple words. The arrows. Okay, so here's the story of this one. Agamemnon has captured a girl when he conquered a city near Troy. They had 10 years with not much to do, so they'd conquer other cities. And her father is a priest of Apollo, and he says, please give me back my daughter. Please, I'll do anything. And Agamemnon, as a jerk, of course, says, no, get out of here, old man. So he prays to Apollo, this priest, and Apollo comes to the Greeks, and he begins to slaughter them to punish Agamemnon for his impiety. So Chryseis has prayed, and Phoebus Apollo hears him, and he starts killing the dogs and the donkeys, and then the men start dying. Most scholars say it's by a plague because they actually call Apollo the mouse god, which is how plagues were often spread by rats. So Apollo comes down with arrows to start killing the Greeks. Of course, they're never called Greeks. They're called Achaeans or Argives. Okay. The arrows rattled on the shoulders of the angry god. And look at the word for rattle, klauso. Okay, make a sharp, piercing sound. And terrible was the twanging of a single silver bow. And what's the word for clanging? Clange, clange, clang. They clanged. He's using onomatopoeia. Homer is. So that gave me permission in my country and Western song to use some onomatopoeia. So here's how Robert Fagles did it in 1990. His prayer went up and Phoebus Apollo heard him. Down he strode from Olympus' peak, storming at heart. With his bow and hooded quiver slung across his shoulders, the arrows clanged at his back as the gods quaked with rage. Here the assonance quaked and rage, clanged back. The god himself on the march, down he came like night. Over against the ships he dropped to a knee, let fly a shaft. Terrifying clash rang out from the great silver bow. First he went for the mules and the circling dogs, and then launched a piercing shaft at the men themselves. A few years after him, Stanley Lombardo did a little more briefly. He actually used the word Greeks. He didn't use all the long epithets, which can become troublesome if you do it very literally. But here he goes. Not Phoebus Apollo, but shortening a little bit. Apollo heard his prayer and descended Olympus crags, pulsing with fury, bow slung over one shoulder, the arrows rattling in the case on his back. As the angry god moved like night down the mountain, he settled near the ships and let loose an arrow. Reverberation from his silver bow hung in the air. I don't like that line too much. Reverberation from his silver bow. It was just the clang, the twang. It was a much simpler term for being noisy. But anyway, so when you read other translators, you don't have to agree with them. Take the best that they've done and then change it a little bit. He picked off the pack animals first and the lean hounds, and then aimed his needle-tipped arrows, I do like that, for sharpened, needle-tipped arrows at them, and shot until the death fires crowded the beach. Okay, so I could show you 10 other translations, but we don't have time. So I'll show you how we did it again. I had a philosophy. My philosophy was turn it into country music. You know, James, Jimmy Dean, Big Bad John. Okay. Crises prayed, Apollo heard, got hotter than a fever. Let me tell you, I had a rhyme scheme actually. Greeks had internal rhymes, but they really didn't rhyme at the end, but I did. So I did AAA, BC, BC, or AB, AB, CCC. This one starts with the 3 semi-rhymes, fever, quiver, river. Crises prayed, Apollo heard, got hotter than a fever. Came down from tall Olympus town, brought silver bow and quiver. His shoulders bearing clacking shafts stormed this raging river. And black the sudden night he knelt and made sharp arrows pierce. His shoulders strained and aimed from ships. Thrap, his arrows fierce. First he hit the asses, then he hit the hounds, then he ripped the men apart and tore those Argives down. Now, thrap sort of turns it into a graphic novel, doesn't it? Batman, pow, bam. But Homer does that with his clang. He once describes donkeys going up and down a hill with these words, paranta, katanta, ananta. It sounds like donkeys clip-clopping going up and down a hill. He uses onomatopoeia. So, to go back to our strategies, in summary, we look for the literal meanings, we look for the sound games, we look for the puns and the connotations, we look at what other translators have done, we make the compromises and make our own choice. And if we find a cognate, if we can find in Greek hero or psyche or any of those words, clang, then we'll try to use those words. And at last, if we have a philosophy, we try to make it our own. So those are the choices I made. And black as sudden night he knelt and made sharp arrows pierce. His shoulders strained and aimed from ships. thrat, his arrows fierce. First he hit the asses, then he hit the hounds, then he ripped the men apart and tore those Argives down. Okay, so do you have a better idea? Let's talk about that. If you wanted to email me, here's our address, and I will put this away and look at your questions. So here we go. How do I find the questions? Sorry. As a translator, the idea that you need to compromise resonates with me a lot. Okay, thank you. I didn't really like that because I wanted to keep cow dies, but I decided to compromise to make an approximation. Hi, Chris. Question regarding the cultural distance between the original language and the final language. Sometimes in prose, you have time and space to do a little explanation or a footnote. But in poetry of this kind, strategies can kill the sound, the rhythm, and the image of the original offers. What do you recommend in this situation? That's very good. That's a very good question. When I haven't published the Iliad yet, but there are a lot of footnotes throughout it. And at the end of each chapter, I will put some explanations. I don't want it to be part of the text. I want it away from that. But it's nice to explain things and why you did certain decisions. That's really nice to be able to do that, but it ruins the poem. I think you're completely right. I don't know what to say, but you're right. But I do like to put footnotes either in the introduction. This is Jackson Crawford's great little book, translating, and he gives the Old Norse on one side and then his translation on the other. But in the introduction and at the back, he gives his reasons for things. He doesn't interrupt the flow of the text. In fact, at the very back, he gives the cowboy Hávamál, where he does the more literal in the front of the book, and then he goes to a little more down-home cowboy look. I didn't know about his book when I decided to do the Iliad as a country western song. But I found I got to meet this guy because we sort of had the same idea of doing a cowboy version of these old classics. Okay, did that answer your question? I hope. Is there any other questions? Next question. Okay, another question. Why did you choose to maintain the 5-7-5 structure in haiku when English and Japanese have very different word and grammar structure? That's a really good question. If you notice some of those by other people, they didn't strictly keep to 5-7-5. I tried to. I know you can have a short and then a little longer than a short, and that would still be considered a haiku. Of all my foreign languages, the one I speak best is Japanese. So I'm comfortable, I guess, doing that is my answer. But I think in some of the other ones, I gave you 3 versions. I don't think I kept it literally 5-7-5 in the other ones. Maybe I did. So I've read haiku translated that don't strictly keep to that because they have to make it work in English. But discipline is always good, especially in poetry. If you can force yourself, then you have to rework it 10 times. You can't just let it flow. I don't know, that Bible passage, I probably did 30 versions of that to get to that finished one. If I had a limited number of vowels. Now, in the Bible, let me tell you, in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, there's half as many words. That's the compromise I made. I put in twice as many words to communicate the same thing. So if it was based on syllables, I would have slaughtered it. I had to make a compromise. With Japanese, it's a good point. But I like that discipline. Do you have any thoughts on eliminating bias in translation? I'm sorry, I'm looking at 2 computers because, for example, how the narrative of the Odyssey differs in translations by men versus translations by women. I had a woman, Carolyn, what's her last name? Anyway, I had her translation of the Iliad up here because I've been reading it, but I was running long, so I cut it. I didn't notice a big difference in the way she translated the Greek. I mean, it was a very sexist society, as we probably still are to some degree. So I don't know how you can eliminate that completely and still stay true to the text. I don't have that skill. Maybe some of you have that skill, but it's an issue, certainly an issue. And by going to a cowboy jargon or idiom, that gave me a certain amount of freedom. But Bronco Buster is still a literal translation of tamer of horses. Okay, that's what the word means. So the translations, that's a very tough question. And that's something you really have to struggle with, I think, nowadays. But I don't have all the good answers for that. Sorry about that. Which one? How can you ensure that we don't change the meaning or strip away the important nuance when translating, especially they may be harder to recognize and express? Yeah, you're 100% right. That's why I cheat, okay? I always use 4 or 5 translators of people that are real scholars in that language that know it better than I do. And then I also go to the original words and see if I can find something there that they didn't find. If you notice the Japanese one, those meanings were quite different with each translator. And I think the original allowed for that. I think cattle die, kinsmen die. Cattle allows for it's your wealth, it's your whole livelihood. I didn't like to go that far from the text, but I tried to find a compromise. But it's a very good question. These are the challenges. This is why it's fun to do. This is what I enjoy doing. I'm trying to get the literal meaning of the text, but also keep the beauty of the sound of the words. And the meter is not going to be perfect. My meter is 14 syllables per line, or 12 to 14 I was shooting for. Homer is actually 18 or 19. So I didn't try to copy his meter. Richmond Lattimore did that better than I could ever do it. So I'm not going to even try for that. So yes, it's always a compromise. You give up something and you gain something. Okay, Monica has, sometimes in prose you have time. Okay, I think we did that one. Yeah, we did that one. I think it's the same question. Regarding the question, cultural distance in the original language and the final language, sometimes in prose you have space to add a little explanation. Yeah, I talked about that. And I do put footnotes at the end or in the introduction. I try to put my reasons. So that's it. Okay, was there any more questions? Again, I gave you my email, or you can just spell my last name backwards. Gnilknock, GNILKNOC @gmail. You can get to me that way also. Gnilknock is my own made-up language. So try it. It's really fun to do. It takes a lot of work, but while you're learning a language and you're trying to get that nuance, I would try it and go for it, and hopefully you'll enjoy yourself, and maybe you'll have something that can get published. If you know any publishers that want to do the whole Iliad, let me know. I haven't got that published yet, but I have high hopes. And the other ones I'm just doing for my own personal pleasure, just for fun. But I've enjoyed each of them, and it really helps you work with that language. So any other questions? Okay, thank you very, very much. And I hope to hear from some of you. And we'll try it. Send me some stuff that you've done. I'd love to read it and see it. So I'm going to hang up now. Thank you very much. Stop screen.